Hey fiber friends! Welcome to Making and Musing. I'm Harriet. This is my podcast episode where I talk about my works in progress, finished objects, and any knitting and crochet and spinning and occasional weaving that I might get up to. This week I've got a finished object, a frog, and a new stash busting work in progress. So let's get started. Hey fiber friends! So it's been a hot minute since I did a longer form video, so I've got a bunch of things to talk about this week. And so let's just dive right in. And the first thing that I have, obviously, to talk about is that I have finished my Andrea Mowry framed sweater. So I will stand up so that you can take a look at it in all its glory. Okay, so a couple of things. If you've made this sweater, you'll notice that I made a significant alteration in that I made it a short sleeve rather than a long sleeve sweater. And so, actually I made a couple of alterations. So when I first started working on this pattern, one of the things that I kind of had some misgivings about, right? So I love the star quilt motif on the front, but if you know the original pattern, right, that also runs down the sleeves, right? So you usually have this at the top framing it, but you have sleeves in this colorwork pattern as well, and then this ribbing around the edge. And so I've been trying on and blocking the sweater as I went along to sort of see how it shapes up. And after I finished putting the neckline on it, right, and it has let's see if I can show you, right, it has a 3-needle bind off right here for the shoulder. And you do short rows across the top. So you work color work in the round for the bulk of the body, and then eventually you split off, and this top portion you do have to work back and forth in color work. So you're purling in color work basically for about 2 repeats of this motif, and then you have to do the same on the back. And then you do short rows across the top and join it together. So once I got all of that portion of it finished, right, so, I had been blocking and trying it on because I had also changed the weight of the yarn that I was using. So the original pattern calls for working it in a worsted weight yarn. And I know a lot of people have commented on this when it came out, when the pattern came out last October, that, you know, when you've got a color work sweater in worsted weight, right, you have to kind of factor in the fact that all of those floats along the back of it, along the bottom of it, right, that those are going to, you know, kind of add to the bulk of the sweater and also add to the warmth of the sweater. And so I know that, you know, from other podcasters that a lot of people kind of gave the sweater a pass for that reason, right? That they were pretty sure that with a worsted weight colorwork sweater, they were going to end up with something that was just too warm for the climate they live in. And so that was also my concern, right? I have sweaters that are, you know, pretty hefty sweaters, and I think of them as my snowstorm sweaters, right? I wear that, or my shoveling sweaters, right? They're the sweaters that I wear kind of when I have to be out shoveling my driveway in a storm or in the aftermath of a storm when it's windy, right? So they're just not something that I can wear indoors to work or just around the house or whatever, because they're too warm. So that was my concern about this pattern, was that I just could not justify putting in the time and effort to do a worsted weight colorwork sweater that I was pretty sure was going to be too warm. So I decided to see if I could find a way to kind of drop the weight of the yarn down a little bit. And so rather than working it in a worsted weight, I decided to work it in a sport weight. So the yarns that I used, let me just check, I've jotted them down here. All right, so the white is Barocco Lannis Light, and the color is Snow Day. Yeah. And then the green that I'm using here, right in the quilt pattern, that's Malabrigo Arroyo in the color Aguas. And that is color number 855. And then the framing pattern, right, so the dark color for the ribbing, that is Magpie Fibers Nest Sport, and the color is Twilight Days. And the only, but I would say the Nest Sport, a little itchy next to skin. That's okay, I'm ignoring it. I feel like one thing we've all gotten better at these days is learning to ignore things that annoy us. So that's what's happening with that, right? So I've just offered that in case if you are someone who, is sensitive to yarns. Magpie Fibers Nest Sport, a little itchy next to skin. You might want to kind of think about that before using it. So I dropped the weight of the yarns down and decided to just see what would happen. And I did a gauge swatch ahead of time. Go me, this is my New Year's resolution, is to do gauge swatches, and in this case it was very much necessary, and I got gauge. So the original pattern called for using a US 7, right, just let me check. Yes, so US 7 or a 4.5 millimeter needle, and then a US 5, which is a 3.75, 3.75. For the ribbing. And so I was able to get gauge using the Malabrigo Arroyo and the Lannis Light using a US 7. And I simply had to do the ribbing with using Magpie Fibers Nest Sport. I had to use a US 4, which is a 3.5 millimeter needle to do the ribbing for the Nest Sport. I also mixed, so Nest Sport is a non-superwash fiber, and the Malabrigo Arroyo is a superwash, and the Lannis Light is also a superwash. And so that is another factor that I would sort of bring up, is that for me personally, I found the color work a little bit fiddly, just because I'm used to doing color work with non-superwash yarns. And so with a superwash yarn, right, they've smoothed out all those scales, so the yarn is a little bit more slippery. So I would say I'm not going to show you a whole lot of my floats on the flip side of it, because I don't feel they're as neat as they usually are when I work with a stickier yarn. So again, it was manageable. The pattern is interesting and engaging. I would say you do have to kind of pay attention to it, because it can be really easy to accidentally flip the colors on it. So it was something that I kind of did the body of it very quickly and then sort of set it aside when I got to the point of purling and the color work. So all this to say, back to the point that I made about opting to do the short sleeves. So I've been trying it on as I worked on it and kind of blocking it as I went along, because I was working with a superwash and color work. I really was sort of nervous that it was going to bloom and smooth out and look nice, and I think it did, right? I think that it looks fine. Right? So my fears were unjustified, but because of that, I tried it on also, and I will say, and I don't know if other people have found this, and this is no shade to Andrea Mowry. I know that she is a much-loved designer, and with good reason, but both with this pattern and also with the Shift-Again cardigan that I made a while back, I found that, again, for my size, this has happened with other designers, that for my particular size, seems to run a little small. So with this sweater in particular, my concern was that it fits over my head, but just fits over my head, right? So anything cinching up that neckline was gonna potentially create a problem for me. And yes, I checked gauge, and yes, I measured, and yes, I paid attention. But anyway, so I put this on, tried it on, and I stood in front of the mirror, and at that point, obviously I didn't have the ribbing here, so I only had this part. And I just remember thinking, like, I really wish I could make this a short sleeve. I think I would sort of prefer that, actually. Because, and I think this is getting back to what I started by saying, right, the original pattern has, I think, bracelet length sleeves on it that also have this pattern. And I don't think they're balloon sleeves, but they are kind of poofy. My definition of poofy, right? Everybody has their own definition of what they're looking for in a sleeve, right? They're definitely not fitted sleeves. And so, you know, when I first looked at the pattern, in addition to the worsted weight, the other issue that I kind of was attentive to was I wasn't sure that I wanted, you know, kind of what looked to me like biggish bracelet length sleeves covered with this quilt star pattern, right? I like the quilt star pattern a lot, but I just was not sure I wanted it all over a sweater. So as I stood there in the mirror kind of thinking, oh, I wish I could make it short sleeved, I thought, well, why can't I? I bet someone already has. Apologies for the siren in the background, because we've got something going on down in town here. So I decided to take myself over to Ravelry and look and see, because I was pretty sure somebody else must have had the idea to do it with short sleeves, and I was right. Somebody had the idea to do it with short sleeves, and it was actually a lot simpler than I had imagined that it would be. They basically just picked up for sleeves using the ribbon yarn and did the ribbon, right? And so, because that's a nice thing about it, right? So that the color work comes out, like it drops the shoulder down a little bit, so all you have to do is add the ribbon to it. And I'm really happy with how it turned out. Like for me personally, I kind of feel like, to me it looks more like it keeps with the idea of a framed sweater. I just did 18 rows of the ribbing. The other thing that I did do is, after I finished the ribbing, tried it on again, noticed that it was flaring out a little bit around the edging of the ribbing, which might also have just been my eye kind of picking up on it. So I just did a crochet around, like a crochet chain stitch around to kind of cinch that in a little bit. Not in every stitch, but maybe every other stitch or so. Again, kind of being careful that I didn't close it up so much that the arms didn't fit. And then the last thing that I had a little bit of a think over was the neckline. So I think in the original pattern, you actually add several rows of ribbing to this. I think maybe 5 rows of ribbing around, and then cast off. I was extremely concerned, first of all, that anything that was going to make that neck hole even a little bit smaller or narrower was going to create a problem for me, because I was just fearful that I would do all of that and then it wouldn't fit over my head. Nobody wants that, right? So I originally thought about doing maybe a few rows of ribbing and then folding it over, but that just looked kind of bulky and weird before I even finished it. So tore that out, ripped it out, and just basically decided to go with a simple thing and did a round of single crochet around the top. Again, being careful not to cinch it in anymore, but enough to give it some structure, right? So the neckline looked okay without anything on it. It did have one little steppy looking decrease, but I think it looked a little bit unpolished, right, without that. And I did like, you know, you have the 3 needle bind off that kind of creates that nice polish there, and it just felt like it pulled the whole thing together. And so, yeah, so I'm really happy. The other alteration was I made mine longer, right? So it's originally a much more cropped version. So I think I actually did an extra repeat. So I think the original version would have been like here on me, right? And that's my belly button. So yeah, no, I don't want to do that. Again, it would be great to do a cropped version if you tend to wear it over a dress or something, or if you just like cropped sweaters. That's just not my jam. So, and I knew I would want to wear it with jeans more often than not. And so, yeah, I'm really happy because it's finished and it's short sleeved. So it's perfect for the kind of changeable April weather that we're getting right now. And so that's my finished object for today. Okay, so, right, if you remember watching like ABC's Wide World of Sports, remember how they'd talk about the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat. And I feel like that's what I've kind of got going on in today's episode, because I've got a finished object with lots of alterations that I'm really happy with. And then I had a frog. And so what I frogged was the Mermaid Avenue socks that I was working on. And I was sort of kicking myself because I actually finished, I think the last episode I showed you, I was already at the point where I was turning the heel on the sock. And then I kind of thought, okay, I'll put the push on Saturday and just try to get the foot done. See if I can get the foot done. And I think I even did a short of me working on the foot of this sock. And so I was approximately an inch away, maybe an inch or two away from finishing the foot of the sock. And I noticed I had made a mistake on the pattern on the instep. And so I, got ready to, I decided, okay, I need to rip back and fix that. Right? I just couldn't live with it being off like that, although it really wasn't all that noticeable. So I decided I would do that. And so after I ripped it back, I realized that it was nearly impossible to get it back onto the needles and figure out where I was in the instep pattern. And kind of running along behind all of this, and it's been happening since I cast this on because I loved the pattern on the sock, or I thought I loved the pattern on the sock. I think I still do love the pattern on the sock. I think maybe I just don't love the pattern on a sock, right? It's a very textured pattern. And so I think that I was registering this in my previous episodes because I was talking about how, gosh, it looks kind of big. And I think it wasn't so much that the sock was big, it's just it looked big to me because the pattern was kind of a poofy sort of pattern. Again, my definition of poofy. So as I had been working on it, and I should have known because it was an enjoyable enough pattern to work on, I just kind of kept setting it aside and I don't want to work on that today. And if you've checked out my channel, you know that one of the first videos that I did on this channel was a video about knowing when to quit and kind of looking at, what neuropsychologist, neuroscientist Annie Duke has to say about quitting, right? About the psychology of quitting. And so I kind of should have known because in the back of my mind, there was a little bit of a, I don't know. Like, I think it was that I really wanted to like this sock pattern because I liked the pattern, I liked the designer, right? It's Summer Lee. If you haven't checked out the videos on her channel, they're wonderful. So I had a lot of things pulling me in the direction of completing the sock. But I think in some ways I may just be one of those people who doesn't really love a textured sock, right? I love socks with cables, but I don't know, sometimes the textured stitch ones, I'm not wild about, right? So a few years ago I made the Hermione Everyday sock. Didn't love that either, right? I mean, I gave it as a gift and it's fine, and the person, who got them loves them, but yeah, I wasn't really enjoying it. So I think there was some of that. So long story short, I decided, I really love the yarn that I have. Let me just pull this back, get the yarn so you can see. So it's this yarn, right? And the color is Where the Sun Don't Shine. And yeah, I noticed that as I was knitting the foot, that I actually liked the way the yarn looked better on the just untextured knit underside of the foot. So when I couldn't get the needles back on and couldn't reclaim the pattern, I just decided, you know what, I'm frogging it. And I was really frustrated with myself because I spent all day Saturday working on it. My hope had been to finish the first sock. And I think what I learned was just what I already knew, which is that, and this is Annie Duke's advice in her book Quit, is that usually you should quit sooner rather than later. And so I really should have listened to my gut instinct, which was, that voice going, I don't know. But I didn't listen until I finally listened, right? It was interesting when I got to a point where it was just like, okay, this is impossible to get this back on the needles and pick it up back where I wanted. And then I was just like, you know what? I don't think I really like the way the sock looks. And one of the things that I thought about was, once you finish this, you've got to do the second sock. And my initial reaction to that thought was, ugh. And then I was like, okay, you need to frog this sock. Okay, so the other thing that I've done this over the past couple weeks since you saw me last is I decided to start a new whip because why not? Right? Actually, Stephen West is hosting the Westknits 2025 Stashbustalong. That's not easy to say. And so there are a couple of Stephen West patterns. I've done the glittering snowscape shawl. I tried doing the Go-Go Dynamo shawl. Oh, the names are really hard to say, right? So I tried doing that last fall. Really didn't like that. That was a project I ended up frogging. I actually made a video about that. It's part of my quit video, which I will put in the show notes below. But one of the other shawl patterns that I really liked is his painting bricks shawl. So that's what I've been doing, and the painting bricks pattern I think is very potato chippy. So here is what I have so far. Zoom in a little. Okay, so the yarn that I'm using for the background pattern, for the grout between the bricks, right, is Cloudborne Fibers. Let me make sure I know what it is. Cloudborne Limited Edition Alpaca Sport. And so there's no real, I'm not really following any particular order in terms of, I have no plan, right, for the color arrangement. I'm just sort of putting things together in ways that I think look good. Okay, so then the last thing that I'm also working on, and I'm not going to hold it up, I'll put a picture on the screen to show you, are the Stella quilt cushions. I finished another one of the front pieces of those, loving those. I'm going to try to do at least one more of them, and then I'm going to start working on the backs of them. So the backs is just a solid color. You basically create a kind of envelope to put the cushion form into. So the quilt cushion casing, the back of it is basically just garter stitch in short rows, and so I'm thinking that I will probably be able to get at least one of those done. That's my goal. And then speaking of goals, one of my other goals is to try to get over 100 subscribers. We've been poised at 99 for a while now, so I'm hoping to get that. And one of the things that I think I'd like to do, I've had an idea for a hat pattern kind of noodling around in my head, and so I'm hoping that if we can get over 100 subscribers, I will try to write up a free pattern for a hat and put that up. So stay tuned for that in an upcoming episode. And I'm also thinking that in terms of the long form videos, I'm probably going to have those happening like every other week moving forward. One of the things that I was finding is that, you know, it's sort of hard to generate enough to talk about from week to week. I begin to understand why people, you know, who have podcasts often do lots of very small projects so that you can show progress, or they're doing lots of, you know, sort of top down, in the round, stackinette on big needles kind of sweater patterns, but that's just not something I really want to do. So I think the solution for me is to podcast long form every other week so that I have something a little more substantial to show you. So on that note, I will wrap things up here. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the week, and I will see you again in the next one.